Assalamualaikum and a very good day. Today we're gonna continue our discussion on cost, but this time around we're gonna focus on the long run cost. Okay. Now, in the previous lecture, I have already explained to you the differences between short run and long run. For short run production period, this is a period of time where firms uses both fixed input and variable inputs. Okay, and for that reason, okay, firms faces with two types of costs, specifically fixed costs and variable costs. Now, when we talk about the long run, long run is the period of time whereby all inputs, okay, are variables. That means the type of the cost that the firm will experience are going to be variable costs only. Okay, so bear in mind that when we talk about the long run, so long run is a period of time whereby firms are using all variable inputs, and the cost that they're going to incur would be the variable cost. Now, some people may start to ask questions, okay, when it comes to long run production period. So how long would that be? Now, it all depends on the industry. Okay, so in economics, when we talk about the short run or the long run, okay, how long would it take? Okay, so it all depends on the industry itself. Okay, so going back to the long run situation, okay, so if you take a look at services industry, okay, for example, dry cleaning services, okay, maybe the long run production period is going to be about few months. Okay, why? Because they only so they only need less number of time, okay, to change or to vary their input. So they are able to vary all the inputs that they use in short period of time. Okay, for example, few months. So that would be the case of services industry. But when we talk about industries that are capital intensive, maybe they're going to need more than that. Okay, so the time period whereby they're going to reach long run is going to be longer. Okay, so here we are talking about industry such as electricity generation. Okay, so firm needs to have very large amount of capital. Okay, so they need more time whereby they are able to vary all the inputs available. Alright, so when we talk about the long run, okay, how long would that be? So it all depends on the industry. Now, so what we're going to do, okay, in this chapter is we're going to look at how firms make decisions in the long run. Okay, so there are a few concepts that we're going to look at. First of all, we're going to try and see how does the long run average cost curve looks like. As I said, okay, all firms are very much concerned about how to produce, okay, each of the good at the lowest cost possible. So that means firms are interested to know to find the minimum cost per unit in the long run. Now, after that, we're going to also look at the concept of economies and these economies of scale, which are very much related to the long run average cost curve. Okay, so let us start by looking at how firm makes decision in the long run. Okay, so to make a long run decisions, okay, so what firms needs to do is they have to look at the cost of various inputs that they use, and also on the available technologies, okay, that can be used to combine these inputs. Okay, so once they have look at the inputs, costs, and also the available technologies, okay, then they will decide on how best, okay, they can combine these inputs, okay, and that can ensure the lowest cost possible. Okay, so in other words, okay, the firms, okay, when they want to make decision in the long run, so it all depends on the expected cost, okay, and also the expected usefulness of the inputs that they have. Okay, so when we talk about the long run, okay, firms have ample time to plan. So what they're going to do is they are going to look at the available resources, okay, and also the technologies that they have at the time, and then they're going to decide on how best they can combine these two, okay, so that they can achieve the lowest cost possible. Okay, now in production, okay, when it comes to long run production, it's very important for firms, okay, to achieve efficiency. And when we talk about efficiency, we mean technical efficiency and also economic efficiency. Now we're going to look at what's the difference between technical efficiency and economic efficiency, which is very important to achieve in the long run. Okay. Now, when we talk about technical efficiency, okay, this is a situation whereby firms, okay, are able to use as few inputs as possible to produce certain level of output. Okay, so in other words, okay, what firms are trying to do in order to achieve technical efficiency is they want to make sure that, okay, the resources that they use are the lowest amount. Okay, so we are not considering about any cost here. Okay, so we are very much concerned about the quantity of resources that we use. So when we talk about technical efficiency, we want to make sure that we are able to maintain the lowest inputs possible. Okay, so as I said, firms are not very much concerned about the cost of inputs, right? So that is technical efficiency. But when we talk about economically efficient, okay, or economic efficiency, it means different thing. Okay, so when we talk about economic efficiency, so we are referring to the cost. Okay, so what firms want to do here is they want to find, okay, the method that can help them to produce, okay, a given level of output at the lowest possible cost. Okay, so that's what the firm wants to achieve when they want to have economic efficiency. Okay, so in other words, when we talk about economic efficiency, it is the least cost, technically efficient process. So not only we want to have, okay, technical efficiency, but we also want to make sure that okay, method that you use is also producing the lowest cost possible, and that's what it means by efficient. So remember that when we talk about efficiency in the long run, it covers, you know, two types of efficiency. So that would be technical efficiency and also economic efficiency. All right. So technical efficiency, we are focusing on ensuring that we use the lowest number of resources. But when we talk about economic efficiency, we want to make sure that we are using the lowest cost method. Okay, so these are two different things. So in the long run, what we are trying to do is we are trying to achieve both, okay, types of efficiency. So in other words, we want to achieve what we call as the least cost, technically efficient process. Okay. Now, so let us look at, okay, what actually happens in the long run. Now, as I mentioned to you in the earlier part of the lecture, okay, the long run period of time, okay, is a time period whereby the firm are using all variable inputs, okay, and they also, okay, has many sizes to choose from. Okay, so that's what we call as the long run. But when we talk about the short run, so the short run, what happens is that the firm is using combination of fixed input and variable input. So meaning that the decision that a firm can make in the short run is kind of limited. Okay, it depends on the size of the firm at that time. Okay, so nothing much can be done, okay, in terms of changing the size of the firm. Okay, so if they started off with one size, okay, of the firm in the short run, so that will be the size that they need to bear, okay, for quite some time. Okay, so this is because there are only some inputs, okay, that they can change, because there are inputs which are fixed, okay, in nature. Now, now remember that in the short run, we have already covered, okay, what we call as the law of diminishing marginal productivity. Okay, so this is a situation, or this is a situation that happens in the short run whenever firms uses combination of fixed input and variable input. Now, because in the long run there are no element of fixed input, okay, that means the law of diminishing marginal productivity doesn't hold in the long run. Okay, so So the law of diminishing marginal returns, or the law of diminishing marginal productivity, is a short run phenomenon, okay? But in the long run, because all inputs are variables, so this particular law doesn't apply. Okay, now what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the shape of our long run cost curve, and we also want to know why, okay, why in the long run, okay, the shape of the long run cost curve is U-shape. Okay, so okay, in the long run, okay, when we talk about the shape, okay, of the long run, okay, cost curve, the shape, okay, is going to be a U-shaped curve. Okay, now why is that the case? Well, it is due to the existence of economies and diseconomies of scale. Now, what is actually economies and diseconomies of scale? Now, when we talk about scale, okay, scale means size. Okay, so this and we know that in the long run, okay, the firm is able to vary all types of inputs that they use. Okay, so meaning that they are able to vary the size of the firm. Okay, so when firms, okay, produce in the long run, so they are able to increase in size. Okay, now, so what we want to do is we're going to see, okay, what does it mean, okay, by having different scale of production in the long run. Now, the scale of production in the long run can be divided into three types. So we have economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and also constant returns to scale. Okay. Now, economies of scale is a situation whereby the firm, okay, is able to experience a decrease in per unit cost as the quantity of production increases, okay, and all the resources are variable. In other words, okay, when we talk about economies of scale, this is the production whereby the firm is able, okay, to vary all their resources, okay, and then for that reason they are able to increase production. But when we talk about the cost per unit, the cost per unit decline. So the firm becomes bigger, it produces more output, but when we talk about the cost per unit, it declines. So this situation is what we call as economies of scale. Okay. Now, when we talk about this economies of scale, now it's going to be the opposite. Okay. So this is where we have an increase in per unit cost as the quantity of production increases and all resources are variable. In other words, when we are able to vary all our resources, okay, so production will increase, but when we talk about the cost per unit, the cost per unit increases. So when firms produce more output, okay, but the cost per unit increases, so this is what we call as diseconomies of scale. Okay. Now, the last type of production scale in the long run is what we call as constant returns to scale. Okay. So when we talk about constant returns to scale, you can see that the unit costs remain constant, okay, as the quantity of production is increased and all resources are variable. So you are able to increase input, and for that reason your output also increases. Okay. But then when we talk about the per unit cost, the per unit cost remains the same, okay, or constant. So this situation is what we call as constant returns to scale. Okay. So when we talk about economics of scale, remember in the long run, a firm is going to experience three types of production scale. Okay, economics of scale, diseconomies of scale, or constant returns to scale. Okay. Okay, now let's look at, okay, an example of a long run average total cost table. Okay, so what we have here is a table, okay, which basically shows, okay, the level of output, okay, the related or the corresponding costs of labor and machines, okay, that the firm use, and also the total and the average cost. Okay, so as you can see that the firm, okay, are using two types of inputs. We have labor and also machineries, And as you can see here, okay, as output increases, okay, the cost of labor and machines increases. Okay, so this shows that, okay, the firm is able to increase, okay, more inputs, particularly labor and machines, to increase output. Okay, and when you look at the okay, so when you look at the total cost that we have here, you can see that total costs continue to increase. So you increase inputs, okay, for both labor, okay, and machineries here. Okay, so you can see that they are increasing. So what happens to output? Output also continue to increase. Now what can be said happens to total cost? You can see that total cost continue to increase. But then when we look at the average cost value, okay, so let's focus on the average cost table. You can see that initially it is quite high. Okay, so for example, when they produce 11 units of output, the cost per unit is $58. But as production increases, notice that the average cost per unit increases. Okay, and then, okay, so the average cost per unit, okay, at first it decreases until the 13 units, okay, but after the 13 units, you can see that the cost per unit, okay, it maintained at 50. Okay, now after the 17 units of output, you can see that the cost per unit of output slowly increases, okay, to 51 and 53 and 56. Okay, now the portion whereby as output increases, okay, the cost per unit decreases. So this is what we call as economies of scale. Okay, so the firm, okay, increase more output, okay, and then when we look at the cost per unit, the cost per unit decreases. So this situation is what we call as economies of scale. Okay, now when you continue to produce more output, notice that the average cost per unit here maintained at 50. Okay, so every time you increase output from 14 to 15 to 16 until 17, notice that the cost per unit maintained. Okay, so this situation is what we call as constant return to scale. Okay, and okay, when you start producing 18 units of output onwards, you can see that the cost per unit start to increase, and this situation is what we call as decreasing return to scale. Okay, now based on the data from the table, okay, so you can basically plot, okay, all the points. Okay, basically what we're going to do is we're going to draw the average cost curve, okay, against the total output, and what you're going to get at the end of the day is a U-shaped curve. So this U-shaped curve is what we call as the average total cost. Okay, that means the total cost per unit of output. So based on the data that we have from the table, okay, so we simply plot, okay, the average total cost value against the total output, and you're gonna get a U-shaped curve. Okay, now notice that, okay, if you look at the curve, you can see that as firm increases output, okay, now what happened to the average total cost? Average total cost slowly decreases, okay, up till the minimum point of 50. Okay, and then so meaning that, okay, the firm, okay, can achieve the lowest cost possible when they start producing 14 units. Okay, after 14 units, the firm experiencing constant cost per unit, and after the 17 units, you can see that the cost per unit starts to increase. Okay, so the decreasing portion here, okay, so this is where you increase your production but the cost per unit decreases. This area, okay, is due to economies of scale. Now when you continue increasing your output here from 14 to 17, you can see that the cost per unit maintained. So this is constant return to scale. And after the 17 units, you can see that you increase more output, but what happens to average total cost? It increases. So this is what we call as decreasing returns to scale. Now, The starting point whereby the firm starts to experience the lowest cost possible. Okay, you can see that the first time the firm experienced the lowest cost is when the firm produced 14 units, isn't it? And the lowest cost per unit is 50. Now this point is what we call as minimum efficient level of production or minimum efficient scale. So that is the starting point when firm starts to experience the lowest cost per unit. Alright? Okay, now what we're going to do next is we're going to look in more detail, okay, how economies of scale happens. Okay, so what brings economies of scale? So just now, okay, we have already identified that economies of scale happens when long run average total cost decreases as output increases. Okay, so when firm increases more production, you can see that the total cost per unit decreases. So this is what we call as economies of scale. Now, in real world production processes, okay, it is very important, okay, for firms, okay, to experience economies of scale. Okay, so economies of scale is very important. Okay, it is extremely important at low levels of production. Okay, so now what we're going to do is how are we going to decide on the starting point, okay, of economies of scale. Now, so this is where it's very important for you to know the term indivisible setup cost. Okay, so an indivisible setup cost is the cost of an indivisible input for which a certain minimum amount of production must be undertaken before the input becomes economically feasible to use. So meaning that, okay, an indivisible setup cost, this is where the firm, okay, is trying to determine, okay, the minimum amount of output that the firm must produce, okay, before, okay, it becomes economically feasible. Okay, now indivisible setup cost, okay, it create many real world economies of scale. Okay, so an example would be the cost of a blast furnace or the oil refinery. So these are examples of indivisible setup cost. Okay, alright, now in the longer run, okay, as I mentioned many times, okay, all inputs are variable. Okay, so because of that, okay, only economies of scale can influence, okay, the shape of the long run cost curve. Okay, so as you can see, economies of scale is very important, and because of that, okay, people who have been involved in business, okay, are always discussing about how to achieve minimum efficient level of production. Okay, can you still recall minimum efficient level of production? Okay, so so remember that, okay, the minimum efficient level of production, that is the starting point whereby the firm experience economies of scale. Okay, now, so when we talk about minimum efficient level of production, okay, this is the amount of production that are able to spread the setup cost, okay, so that the firm can undertake production profitably. Okay, so in other words, okay, at the minimum efficient level of production, okay, so the firm is able to produce, okay, certain level of output whereby they are able to maintain the lowest cost possible, okay, and get the maximum profit. Okay, now the minimum efficient level of production, okay, is reached, okay, when the size of the firm expands to a size large enough so that the firms can take advantage of all economies of scale. Okay, so in other words, okay, if a firm, okay, wants to achieve minimum efficient level of production, what they need to do is they need to expand production, okay, and achieve a size whereby they can take advantage of the economies of scale. Okay, So, when we talk about industries and their experiences, okay, so most industries, they experience both economies and diseconomies of scale. Okay, so remember that if the firm wants to achieve economies of scale and at the same time the lowest cost per unit, then they need to achieve what we call as the minimum efficient scale. Okay, so the minimum efficient scale is the minimum point, okay, of the long run average cost curve. Okay, so that's where you have the output level where the cost per unit of output is the lowest. Okay, and the minimum efficient scale actually depends on the industries involved. Okay, so when we talk about industries with low startup costs, then the minimum efficient scale would be faster to achieve. But when we talk about industries, okay, with a very large amount of investment, then the minimum efficient scale is going to be very huge. All right. Okay. Now that we have looked at economies of scale, what does it mean? So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at diseconomies of scale. Alright. Now remember that, okay, in the short run production, we have already discussed about diminishing marginal productivity. Okay, and diminishing marginal productivity actually refers, okay, to the decline in productivity caused by increasing units of variable input being added to a fixed input. So when you continue adding your variable inputs to a fixed input, you can see that the productivity of your variable input starts to decline. So this is what we call as diminishing marginal productivity. And bear in mind that this is a short run concept. Okay, so it only applies in the short run. Now, when we talk about diseconomies of scale, this actually refers to decreases in productivity which occur when there are equal increases of all inputs. Okay, so what happens is that when firms are able to increase all the inputs that they have, okay, but the productivity level decreases. So this situation is what we call as diseconomies of scale. Okay, so diseconomies of scale actually occur on the right side of your long run average cost curve. Okay, so this is where you have the upward sloping, okay, of your average cost curve, which is which represents an increasing average cost. Okay, now why is that the case that, okay, when firms becomes larger in size, okay, they're gonna experience diseconomies of scale? So remember that we started off with economies of scale. Remember, okay, economies of scale. This is a situation whereby the firms, they are able to produce more output, but at the lowest cost per unit. Okay, so there are many reasons for that. Okay, for example, maybe they have, you know, specialization. Okay, when they becomes bigger, they enjoy you know, lower interest rate. Okay, they are able to conduct bulk purchasing. So that's why when firms become large, okay, they enjoy lowest cost per unit. Okay, but when firm becomes too large, okay, they produce more and more output. Okay, you can see that cost per unit increases. Okay, so why does this happen? Okay, why do we have this diseconomies of scale? Well, one of the reason is the monitoring costs, okay, increase. Okay, so when monitoring costs, okay, increases in the long run, then that results in an increase in cost per unit. Okay, so what do we mean by monitoring costs? Now, monitoring costs are the costs, okay, that firms incur, okay, when they need to see or ensure that their employees are doing what they are supposed to do. Okay, so remember that in a large organization, okay, you are producing more and more output, but you also uses many laborers. Okay, now if you want to ensure that each individual labor are doing what they are supposed to do, then we need to hire people, okay, to do this monitoring. Okay, and this costs money to the firm. Okay, so when monitoring costs, okay, increases, that means, okay, the cost per unit will also increases. Okay, so when the firm size increases, okay, you're gonna see that, okay, people will, be demotivated, okay, because they are only, they are only focusing on doing their tasks. Okay, so there is less interaction with the other people, because the other people, they are also divided in other tasks. Okay, so this results in, low morale, okay, less team spirit, because the firms is huge. Okay, so in order to, bring back, okay, or to motivate these people, so the firm needs to incur extra costs. Okay, for example, they need to, conduct some training, okay, to increase these people motivation, okay, and their expertise. Okay, sometimes, okay, the firm also need to incur extra costs in terms of auditing, just to make sure that these people are doing the right thing. Okay, so this all brings more cost to the firm. Okay, so remember that in an organization, okay, with many workers, it's very important to keep a very high team spirit. Okay, so when we talk about team spirit, this is the feelings of friendship, okay, and being part of a team that brings out the people's best effort. So this is very important. So if we don't have, okay, a manager who can basically, develop, okay, the team spirit among the workers that we have, then there's going to be problems in an organization. Okay, all right. And then moving on to constant returns to scale. Okay, so constant return to scale explain the portion of your long run average cost curve which do not change with the level of output. Okay, so it is basically shown by the flat portion of your long run average total cost curve. All right, okay. Now, if you look at this diagram, okay, so this is the long run average total cost curve, which we have derived from the cost table just now. You can see that it is still U-shaped. Okay, so the portion whereby, okay, as quantity of output increases, the cost per unit decreases. You can see that this is the region which is described as economies of scale. Okay, so remember that economies of scale is where the firm is able to enjoy lower cost per unit as output increases. Okay, now the question is, how come, okay, firms is able to enjoy lower cost per unit even though they produce more output? Okay, so what factors actually brings about economies and economies of scale? Okay, now do you have any idea, okay, why firms, okay, is able to enjoy lower cost per unit even though they are producing more and more output? Okay, now the answer is that there are, few factors actually that can bring about economies of scale. Okay, so I will mention few, okay, of these factors. Number one is economies of specialization. Okay, now when firms becomes larger, okay, what they have to do is they have to divide, okay, these labours into different departments. Okay, and each departments are responsible to conduct several tasks. Okay, now so for example, the department of packaging, they are responsible to pack their product. Okay, and then we have the department for marketing who are responsible to market the product. We have the department, okay, for human resource who are responsible, okay, to look after the welfare of the workers. Okay, for example. Okay, so each, okay, each group of people, okay, in the organization are divided into several tasks. And as you know, when we keep doing the same thing all over again, we become, very good at it. Okay, you tend to make less mistake, and this is translated into lower cost. Okay, so that is why, okay, when firm becomes bigger, they are able to do specialization, divide their jobs into several tasks, and for that reason this leads towards efficiency. Okay, so efficiency is translated into lowest cost. Okay, so that's one. Now the second factor is that, large firms is able to buy their resources in bulk, okay, or they are able to conduct what we call as bulk purchasing. Okay, so as you know, when we talk about bulk purchasing, that means the firms is able to buy the large quantity of inputs at the lowest cost per unit. Okay, so this means the cost of production is also lower. But if you look at smaller firm, okay, you can see that smaller firm, they tend to buy their resources in smaller quantity, and for that reason their cost per unit tend to increase. So that explains why huge firms, okay, very large firm is able to sell their product at a much lower price as compared to smaller firms. Okay, why is that the case? Because the larger firm is able to buy the resources in large quantity, okay, and because of that they are able to enjoy, okay, the lower cost per unit for their resources. Okay. Now, another reason can be attributed to the lower cost of financing. Okay, so as you know, larger corporations, okay, because they have better financial position, okay, they have more assets, okay, they have their names, okay, they have been in the market for quite some time, and for that reason, okay, banks are more confident, okay, to give out loans to them. Okay, and sometimes these loans are given at a much lower interest. So that means the cost of financing is lower. And for that reason, this explains why firms, okay, when they become larger, they enjoy lower cost per unit. Okay, so the factors which I mentioned just now explain the economies of scale. Okay, now remember that the starting point, okay, whereby the firm, okay, enjoy the lowest cost per unit, that is what we call as minimum efficient scale. And you can see that, okay, within this range the cost per unit maintained, so this is what we call as constant returns to scale. Now after the last point of constant return to scale, you can see that when firms increase production, the cost per unit starts to increase. Okay, now this region is being labeled as this economies of scale. Okay, now why is it that when firms becomes larger, the cost per unit increases? Okay, so as I said just now, one of the factors is the monitoring cost. Okay, so when firms becomes larger, okay, workers are being divided into several departments, okay, so, and then there are very many layers between the top management and the production departments. Okay, so sometimes these people, they feel alienated. Okay, they have low morale. Okay, there's lack of team spirit. So for that reason, okay, firm needs to incur extra costs, okay, to basically motivate these people. Okay, so that's cost money to the firm. Okay, and sometimes, okay, when the firms becomes larger, whenever they want to make decision, it takes a longer time. Okay, so for example, let's say the production department, okay, they need to buy or they need to replace an existing machine, okay, because that machine, okay, is broken. Okay, so it's having problems, so the production team believe that they need to replace the machine. But then in order to get the new machine, okay, they need to go through several layers, okay, until the top management, so that takes time. Okay, so they need more time, okay, just to make sure that they are able to get the machine. Okay, so just imagine how many days, okay, production doesn't happen, and that costs money to the firm. So that's why when firms becomes larger, okay, the firm incur higher cost per unit because it takes a longer time for a decision to be made. All right. Okay. Okay, so this is again another diagram, okay, that tries to show you, okay, the three scale of production in the long run in much detail, and this is actually based on our production table just now, okay, which we have already looked, okay. So as you can see again, okay, it is divided into three areas or three regions. The first one is economies of scale. Remember, this explains, okay, the areas where as production increases, the cost per unit decreases. So the middle area is what we call as the constant returns to scale. So this is where the firm is able to experience, okay, the lowest cost possible, okay, even though production increases, and you can see that the cost, okay, actually maintains, okay, and then when the firm produce very large output, you can see that the cost per unit increases. Okay, so as I mentioned just now, okay, you can see that in the first area, okay, so the average total cost or the cost per unit declines, okay, due to economies of scale, okay, and then after the 14 units, you can see that the average total cost is constant, and this is actually due to constant returns to scale. And when your average total cost rises, and this is actually due to this economies of scale, okay. Now the starting point, okay, whereby you experience the lowest cost per unit, you can see that when you start producing 14 units, this is where you experience the lowest cost per unit, which is 50. So this is what we call as minimum efficient level of production, okay. So this is your typical long run average cost curve, okay. As you can see, it is U-shaped, okay. Why it is U-shaped? Well, it is due to economies of scale, constant return to scale, and diseconomies of scale, okay. So economies of scale reflects the lower cost per unit, the decreasing cost per unit as output increases, okay. The middle range, okay, explain how the firm, okay, experience a constant cost per unit as output increases, and the large range actually explain how firms, okay, when they becomes larger, they experience a higher, okay, and increasing average total cost. All right, okay. Now so this is the diagram, okay, that shows the constant return to scale. So what I'm trying to do is just I take an excerpt, okay, of the constant return to scale. So you can see that this is a constant return to scale. It is straight line, okay, and then on top of that, okay, and this is actually derived from a series of your short run average total cost curve, which I'm going to explain in a while, okay. All right, now so far we have already looked at economies and diseconomies of scale in detail. I've already shown you the long run average total cost curve and where exactly the area of economies and diseconomies of scale. So now what we would like to do is we want to know why it's very important for firms to know about economies and diseconomies of scale, okay. Now economies and diseconomies of scale, okay, it plays a very important role, okay, in real world long run production decisions. So whenever firms wants to make decision in the long run, they need to look at economies and diseconomies of scale, okay. Now if you notice, okay, so far, okay, since we have already looked at the short run and the long run, notice that both long run and short run average cost curve have the same U shape, okay, but the underlying causes, okay, of these shapes differ, okay. Now why is it that in the short run, okay, we have a U-shaped curve, Well, that is due to the fact of law of diminishing marginal productivity. So firms are using combination of fixed input and variable input. Okay, but when we talk about long run production, okay, why the long run average cost curve is U-shaped? Well, that is due to economies, and this is economies of scale. Okay, so in the long run, all inputs are flexible, but in the short run, okay, you're gonna have both fixed input and variable inputs. Okay, and for that reason, your long run cost will always be less or equal to short run costs. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do next is we're gonna learn, okay, how we derive to the long run average cost curve. Okay. So far, okay, I have introduced you to the shape of the long run average cost curve. You know that it is U-shaped. You understand that, okay, the U-shaped curve is due to the economies of scale. But what we're going to do next is we're going to look at how we actually derive the U-shaped curve. Okay, and this requires us to relate the short run average cost concept with the long run average cost concept. Okay. Okay, now the thing is, okay, there is an envelope relationship, okay, between long run and short run average cost curve. Okay, now each short run cost curve, okay, it touches the long run cost curve at only one point. Okay, now in the short run, okay, you can see that all expansion must proceed by increasing only the variable input. Nothing much can be done on the fixed input. Okay, so this limitation actually increases the cost to the firm. Okay, so what we have here, okay, so what I'm going to do is so what we have here is a series of the short run average cost curve. Okay, so you have, okay, SRATC1, okay, with its SRMC1. Okay, so this is your short run marginal cost 1, this is your short run average total cost 1. Okay, and then you also have another set of short run and average total cost and marginal cost in the short run. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of short run average total cost curve. Okay, now bear in mind that each, okay, of the set of the short run average cost curve, okay, actually reflects the size of the firm. Okay, so meaning that size 1 reflects the smallest size of the firm, and then you have size 2, okay, size 3, and size 4 being the largest. Okay, now what happened is that, okay, in the short run, okay, when firms is endowed with size S1, so if they want to experience the lowest cost per unit, so they have to produce, okay, somewhere around here. Okay, but if they want to produce more, they are not able to experience the lowest cost per unit. Okay, so they will need to incur higher costs. Okay, why is that the case? As I said, they have limitation in terms of the fixed input. They cannot increase the fixed input. But in the long run, because you make decision based on what is expected to happen, so you are able to choose, okay, what size of the firm is suitable for you. Okay, so if let's say in the long run, okay, you feel that you want to have size of S2, then you're gonna make sure that you have this size and produce, okay, at the lowest cost possible. So what happened is that firm actually, in the long run, what they're trying to do is they're gonna make a decision by choosing the minimum point on the short run average cost curve. So the long run average cost curve ni is the envelope of the short run average cost curve. Okay, now let me show you this in detail. Okay, now as I mentioned to you just now, okay, so the long run average cost curve, okay, it actually illustrates the lowest cost of producing each level of output when the firm can build, okay, the most appropriate plant to produce certain level of output. Okay, now, so again here, okay, we have several sets of short run average cost curve. As I said, each short run average cost curve represents the size of the firm. Okay, so SAC1 being the smaller size, and then you can see that as you increase production, the size, you need to have different sizes of firm. So meaning that if you want to produce a very large output, then you may want to have a size of the firm represented by SAC5. Okay, now if let's say, okay, in the short run, okay, the size of the firm that you have is represented by SAC1. Okay, so if you want to enjoy the lowest cost per unit, you have to produce at point Q2. Okay, notice that at point Q2 you get to enjoy the lowest cost per unit. Okay, but if let's say you want to increase production to Q3, okay, you can see that nothing much can be done on the size of the firm. So the size of the firm still maintained at SAC1. Okay, so you cannot increase the size of the firm because in the short run you are facing with fixed input and variable input. So even though you want to produce Q3, okay, you can only produce at a much higher cost per unit. Okay, so in the short run, okay, you can see that nothing much can be done in terms of changing the size of the firm. Okay, so if the size of the firm is given by SAC1, you can get the lowest cost possible by producing Q2. Okay, once you decide to increase production, you can do that, but at a much higher cost per unit. Now, when we talk about long run, okay, firm will not face any problem whenever they want to increase their output. Why is that the case? Because in the long run, all resources are variable. So whenever they want to produce more output, they can simply change the size of the firm. So for example, if they want to produce an output equals to, let's say, Q4, so maybe they need to have size of the firm equals to S4. Okay, so that's where they get the lowest cost possible. Okay, and then if they want to have if they want to produce an output, okay, somewhere above Q5, then maybe they want to have size SAC1. Okay, so meaning that in the long run, what happened, the firm, when they make decision, they're gonna always choose, okay, the size of the firm that can give them the lowest cost per unit. So when you join all this, okay, minimum point on your short run average cost curve, you're going to get a very wide U-shaped curve, which is your long run average cost curve. Okay, alright, so this is another diagram, okay, which try to explain, okay, the same thing as I mentioned just now. Okay, so again we have several series of short run average cost curve which represent different size of the firm, and in the long run, what happened is that each firm, they try to choose the size that can give them the lowest cost per unit. So if you join all this minimum point, that's how you got the long run average cost curve. Okay, so remember that the long run average total cost, okay, is the lowest cost combination of resources, okay, with which each level of output is produced when all resources are variable. So when you look at the long run average total cost curve, you will always, okay, able, okay, to get the lowest cost combination of resources, okay, which allow, okay, the firm to produce certain level of output. Okay, and bear in mind that, okay, in the long run, all resources are variable. Okay, so the long run average total cost curve, okay, gets its shape from the economies and diseconomies of scale. Okay, so that's why, okay, it is U-shaped. When producing, okay, each unit of output, okay, becomes less costly, okay, remember that is due to economies of scale. Okay, if producing each unit of output becomes more costly, then this is what we call as diseconomies of scale. And if unit cost remains constant when output increases, then this is what we call as constant returns to scale. Okay, so remember that. Okay, the long run average cost production, okay, it is always U-shaped, and it is due to these three scale of production, namely economies, diseconomies, and constant return to scale. Okay, so the last slide, okay, simply shows you what the firm, okay, try to achieve. Firm always wants to go for economies of scale, which is the decreasing portion of your long run average total cost curve. And if you draw it in detail, actually, to get this long run average total cost curve in the economies of scale region, okay, you have a series of short run average total cost curve which looks like the ones that we have here from SR-ATC1 until SR-ATC3. Okay, so what we have actually covered today is looking at the long run costs of production. Okay, so remember that in the long run, firm uses two types of input. Firm uses only one type of input, okay, namely variable inputs. Okay, so there is no element of fixed input. Okay, so meaning that in the long run, okay, the only cost available is going to be variable cost. Okay, so now what happened is that in the long run, okay, firm is able, okay, to experience what we call as economies and diseconomies of scale. So this explains the U shape of your long run average cost curve. So firm will always strive to achieve economies of scale, especially the minimum efficient scale, because the minimum efficient scale, that will be the starting point whereby firm start to enjoy the lowest cost possible. All right. And then another thing that we have looked at is in terms of how we actually derive the long run average cost curve. So as you can see, the long run average cost curve is derived by joining a series, or the minimum point of a series of the short run average total cost curve. Alright, so what we have done, okay, so far we have already looked at production, okay, both in the short run and also in the long run. We have also looked at the cost involved in the short run and in the long run. So what we are going to do next in the next lecture, we'll be looking at how firms make decisions, okay, in order to achieve maximum profit. And as you know, whenever we talk about profit is the difference between total revenue and total cost. So we have learned about demand and the concept of total revenue when we look at demand analysis. Okay, and then we have also looked at the production and cost concept to understand the cost component. So in the next lecture to come, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how firms make decision. Now the decision made by the firm actually depends on the type of market or industry that the firm is operating. Okay, so notice that later on you're going to see that there are 4 different types of market, namely perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. Okay, so we're going to look at how firms make decision in each of the market, and in the next lecture we're going to start with the perfect competitive market and how firm, okay, makes decision to achieve the maximum profit possible. Okay, so that's it from me today. So I hope to see you again, okay, next time, and we'll be covering a topic on perfect competition. Thank you.